There was a man who bled from his hands for 50 years and never once told anyone it hurt. There was a man who could smell your sins before you confessed them. There was a man who fought the devil, physically, in a stone cell in the mountains of Italy, and woke up the next morning with bruises he couldn't explain. His name was Padre Pio, and before he died, he said something so simple, so quiet, that most people miss it completely. He said that after a certain point in life, God stops asking you to prove yourself. God stops asking you to perform. He only asks you to surrender. If you're over 60, or if you love someone who is, I need you to stay with me for the next few minutes. Because what I'm about to tell you might be the most important thing you hear all year. Let's start at the beginning. Not the beginning of his fame, the beginning of his wound. September 20th, 1918. A small Capuchin friary in San Giovanni Rotondo, a dusty town in the hills of southern Italy. Padre Pio was praying alone in the choir loft after Mass, in front of a crucifix, when something happened that would mark him, literally, for the rest of his life. He described seeing a mysterious figure, wounded, bleeding. And when the vision faded, he was bleeding too. From his hands, from his feet, from his side, the stigmata, the wounds of Christ crucified, appearing on the body of a 31-year-old friar who had done nothing but pray, fast, and serve the poor his whole life. Doctors examined him. Skeptics examined him. The Vatican itself investigated him more than once for years. Nobody could explain it. The wounds never got infected. They never fully healed. For 50 years, he bled almost a cup of blood a day, and he kept saying Mass, kept hearing confessions 12, 15 hours at a time, kept smiling at the pilgrims who lined up outside his door before the sun even rose. Now here's the part that stops me every time I think about it. He didn't want the stigmata. He begged God to take it away, or better yet, to give him the pain without the visible marks, so nobody would make a fuss over him. He wasn't chasing a miracle. The miracle chased him. And I think that's the first lesson before we even get to the part about turning 60. The holiest people in history were never the ones performing for an audience. They were the ones who wanted, more than anything, to disappear into God and be left alone with him. Padre Pio spent 50 years trying to hide a wound that the whole world could see. If you feel something stirring in your chest right now, a little ache, a little recognition, I want you to pause, really pause. Sit with that feeling for 5 seconds before you keep watching. Something in you already knows this story matters to you. Let's talk about the devil for a minute. Because Padre Pio's life was not all soft candlelight and gentle blessings. It was warfare. The friars who lived with him used to hear noises coming from his cell late at night, crashing, banging, sometimes what sounded like furniture being thrown across the room. They'd find him in the morning exhausted, bruised, his habit torn. He said the enemy came to him in monstrous forms, sometimes as demons, sometimes disguised as his own superiors, trying to trick him into disobedience, sometimes as seductive figures trying to pull him away from his vows. He once said that if people could see how many demons God allows to torment a single soul, they would die of fear. And yet he also said, and this is the part I need you to write down somewhere, that the devil is like a chained dog. He can bark, he can lunge, he can terrify you, but he cannot touch you unless you walk within reach of the chain yourself. Think about that the next time fear grabs you at 2 in the morning. The noise is real. The danger is exaggerated. Stay outside the chain. Now let's talk about his gifts, because this is where the stories get almost impossible to believe, except that thousands of witnesses, doctors, bishops, and ordinary pilgrims all told the same kinds of stories, independently for decades. By location, people swore they saw Padre Pio, in the flesh, in places he had never physically traveled to, comforting a dying soldier on a battlefield, appearing at the bedside of someone in another country who was calling out to him in prayer. He never fully explained how it happened. He simply said that for God, distance is not an obstacle to love. Reading souls. This is the one that terrified people the most. Pilgrims would travel for days, wait in line for hours, sometimes for years, just to make a confession to Padre Pio. And when they finally knelt in that confessional, he would sometimes stop them mid-sentence and tell them the sin they were too ashamed to say out loud. Grown men fainted. Hardened skeptics walked out of that box on their knees, weeping, converted in a single afternoon. He wasn't guessing. He said God simply showed him what was hidden, so that no soul could hide from mercy, only from the confessing of it. And here is where I want you to really lean in, because this next part is the whole reason we're talking today. Padre Pio spent his entire priesthood telling people the same thing over and over in 1,000 different ways. Confession is not about the sin. Confession is about the relief. He compared the soul that carries unconfessed guilt to a man dragging a corpse behind him everywhere he goes, to work, to dinner, to bed. Confession is the only way to finally set the body down. He used to tell people, "Don't come to me and give me a grocery list of your failures like you're reciting facts. Come to me broken. Come to me relieved before you even open your mouth, because you already know the door is going to open for you." If you have not been to confession in a long time, 10 years, 20 years longer, I am not here to shame you. I'm here to tell you that Padre Pio would have opened that door for you himself, gladly at 3 in the morning if he had to. That's actually true. He often heard confessions from 4 in the morning until nightfall, refusing to turn people away, even when his own body, wounded and bleeding, was collapsing from exhaustion. Now, the mustard seed. You've heard the phrase, faith, like a mustard seed, can move a mountain. It sounds like a nice greeting card line until you actually hold a mustard seed in your hand. It is smaller than a grain of rice. It is almost nothing. And Padre Pio built his entire spiritual life around that almost nothing. He didn't tell people to have massive, dramatic, mountain-moving faith. He told them to have a mustard seed's worth, a flicker, a single, "I still believe even though I don't feel it right now." That's it. That's enough. Because faith was never meant to be a bonfire you build yourself. It's a seed God plants, and all he asks is that you don't rip it out of the ground on the hard days. His most famous words, the ones stitched onto rosaries and framed on kitchen walls in 1,000,000 homes around the world, were 3 simple instructions. Pray. Hope. Don't worry. He said worry does nothing. It doesn't undo yesterday, and it doesn't secure tomorrow. It only steals today. Prayer, he said, is a lifeline, and I want you to actually picture that word. A lifeline. The rope a drowning man grabs onto. You don't examine a lifeline for its beauty while you're drowning. You don't ask whether you're praying correctly. You just grab it, with whatever strength you have left, and you hold on. This is where I need to bring you to the part I promised at the very beginning. What God no longer requires of you after 60. Padre Pio spent his life watching people, young, ambitious, driven people, walk into his confessional, convinced that holiness was a performance. Do more, say more prayers, fast harder. Confess more precisely. Prove yourself worthy, brick by brick, like you're building a cathedral God is going to inspect with a measuring tape. But he told a different story to the elderly who came to him, the widows, the retired laborers, the grandmothers whose hands shook too much to hold a rosary properly anymore. He told them something that should bring every one of us to tears, that God does not measure the second half of your life by your productivity. He does not need you to perform. He does not need your resume of good work stacked higher and higher. What he asks, once your body starts to slow, once your energy starts to fade, once the world stops asking anything of you, is simply this: surrender, trust. Let him carry what you can no longer carry yourself. Padre Pio used to say that an old woman sitting quietly with her rosary, offering up her aches and her loneliness and her tiredness, does more for the world than 100 sermons, because at that stage of life the currency of heaven is not achievement. It's surrender. God isn't asking you to run anymore. He's asking you to rest in him, and to trust that resting in him is not laziness, it's the deepest act of faith there is. I want you to really let that land. If you're 60, 70, 80 years old, and you feel like you're not doing enough anymore, like your best years of service are behind you, Padre Pio would look you dead in the eye and tell you that you are wrong. You're suffering. offered up in silence, your prayers whispered from a chair by the window, your patience with a body that no longer obeys you the way it used to. That is not nothing. That is holiness in its purest form. That is the mustard seed, fully grown. So let's make this practical, because Padre Pio never wanted anyone to just feel something and then do nothing about it. He wanted action. He called himself half-jokingly the least of all the friars, and yet he moved mountains with basic, repeatable habits. So here is what I want you to actually do, starting today. First, pray the rosary like it's a conversation, not a checklist. Padre Pio called the rosary his weapon, not a decoration, not a nice tradition, a weapon for spiritual battle. When you pray it, don't just recite the words like you're reading a grocery list. Picture the scene in each mystery. See Mary at the foot of the cross. See the empty tomb. Let the mystery breathe for 10 seconds before you move on. 5 decades prayed slowly with attention will do more for your soul than 50 decades rushed through on autopilot. Second, go to confession. Actually go. This week if you can. Padre Pio said the confessional is the place where a soul takes off a coat that's been soaking wet for years and finally feels the warmth of the fire. You don't need the perfect words, you just need to walk through the door. Third, stop measuring your worth by your output. If you're older, if your body has slowed, if the world has quietly stopped asking things of you, that is not a punishment. That is an invitation to become, finally, a person of prayer instead of a person of performance. Fourth, when fear comes at night, remember the chained dog. Say it out loud if you have to. You can bark, but you cannot touch me. Then pray one Hail Mary and go back to sleep. Padre Pio wasn't afraid of demons banging on his door. You don't have to be afraid of the ones whispering in your head. Now, if any part of this story touched something in you, if you felt Padre Pio's presence in these last few minutes, if something in your chest went quiet and warm while I was talking, I want you to tell me in the comments. Write it down. Say his name. Say, Padre Pio, pray for me. Sometimes just typing those words out is its own small prayer. And if this is the kind of story that feeds your soul, the real ones, the ones about saints who bled and fought and forgave and never stopped believing that God was closer than their own heartbeat, then do me a favor. Like this video, comment below, subscribe, so the next story finds you, because there is another one coming, and I promise you, it's just as powerful as this one. Padre Pio died on September 23, 1968. In his final hours, the stigmata that had marked his body for 50 years quietly disappeared, leaving his skin unmarked, as if the wound had finally finished its work. His last words to the friars around him were simple. He said, "I see 2 mothers." He was speaking of his own mother, and of Our Lady waiting for him 50 years of bleeding, 50 years of spiritual warfare, 50 years of sitting in a wooden box for 15 hours a day, so that broken people could finally set down what they'd been carrying. And in the end, he didn't need the wounds anymore, because the wounds had done exactly what they were meant to do. They had taught the whole world what surrender looks like. So wherever you are right now, whatever chair you're sitting in, whatever age you've reached, whatever weight you've been carrying without telling anyone, I want you to take one slow breath. And I want you to hear this the way Padre Pio would have said it to you, gently, without judgment. You don't have to prove anything anymore. You don't have to perform. You only have to pray, hope, and don't worry. May Padre Pio pray for you tonight. May his wounds remind you that suffering offered up is never wasted. And may you rest, really rest, in the God who has been carrying you long before you ever thought to ask him. God bless you. I'll see you in the next one.